So, to give you a short introduction, so Pirkko is joining our today's webinar as a guest speaker from Sorainen law firm. So I'm really excited and truly honored that we have such a guest speaker today with us. And I know the webinar about the GDPR topics is something that our users have waited for a long time. So hi, Pirkko.
Hi, I finally figured it out how it works. It's my first time on this platform, so sorry.
All good, perfect. I'm really glad to have you here today, and I think all of our users and listeners are really excited to have you here as well today. So how has the morning been so far?
Busy, busy, but good. Busy in a sense that I've been trying to prepare for you something interesting to share and discuss.
Okay, perfect. Well, our today's agenda would be that I will give you a short introduction on why we have gathered here today. And then I will give the floor to Pirkko, who has, I'm sure, has prepared a detailed overview of the legal framework and all the basic theory about GDPR and data processing. And on the second half of the webinar, I will go more practical and show you some possible solutions that you can implement using Teamdash software. So, but to start with the introduction. So my name is Triin Elias. I am the customer success team lead here at Teamdash, and I have been working here for almost 3 years now. And I can say that Teamdash users have been waiting for this webinar for quite some time. And I see that the importance of being GDPR compliant within hiring processes is important, it's significant, it's visible. And I did notice that our today's audience is much wider than just Teamdash users. So I would just briefly introduce who we are and what we do. So Teamdash is a talent acquisition software mainly built for in-house talent teams who have a variety of different roles to hire for, or a high volume of applicants, or both. And how we help our clients is that we enable to automate everything that is reasonable to automate within a hiring process. And that includes including consent management to process personal data. And our clients, we have over 3,000 happy recruiters using Teamdash, and we have a variety of different industries represented, like retail, manufacturing, logistics. And as I highlighted before, our audience today comes from a variety of different countries. And likewise, we have clients from the Baltics, the UK, Finland, Poland, and other countries. And now what brings us here today? As you can see, recruiters hold quite a lot of responsibility when it comes to data processing. And in recent times, the fines for personal data regulation breaches have reached even 7-digit figures. So it's quite obvious that employers hold a risk and by processing candidates' data, and it's really important that they know what happens to their applicants' data. And before we look at the possible solutions, how recruiters can be sure that their processes are GDPR friendly, I would now give the floor to Pirkko, and so you can start to introduce the theory and the framework around it. And I just wanted to highlight to our listeners today that if you have any questions, then I would advise you to use the questions tab, and then we can later come back, or if we lack some time, then we'll make sure that we can give you the answers in written way. If you want to share your experiences and comments and thoughts, then you can use the chat window here in Livestorm. But okay, thank you. And Pirkko, the floor is yours.
Hello, and do you see my slides? I hope so. Okay, I'm Pirkko and I'm a counsel in a law firm, Sorainen. And Sorainen is a pan-Baltic law firm. We operate in each 3 Baltic countries. I'm personally from our Estonian office, and I have been working with employment law and data protection matters for a very, very long time, more than 20 years already. So I hope I know what I'm talking about. And of course, GDPR is universal. It applies in each of our EU member states directly. So most of what I'm going to talk about today applies everywhere in Europe. However, I might make certain references to Estonian laws, since I am an Estonian lawyer. So in those instances, you can contact your own local legal counsels to check whether something like that applies in your relevant countries as well. So let's start. First of all lawyers like to talk about legal framework. I already mentioned GDPR. So what it is a General Data Protection Regulation established in the European Union. And it is probably not a surprise or news to anyone anymore that we have this type of regulation. So it's directly applicable in all EU member states, provides universal rules for collecting, storing and using personal data, but there could be other local regulations or guidelines that may exist and apply. So therefore, I would encourage everyone to check also locally whether there is anything that applies in addition to the GDPR. Specifically in the context of employment or recruitment. GDPR applies to processing that is automatic and systematic, so not everything is covered, and it applies to anyone processing the data of EU citizens regardless of where the processor is itself located. And one very important aim of the GDPR was to give individuals more control over their personal data. So today we will also briefly touch upon that as well. GDPR regulation is a very comprehensive legal framework, so we are not going to cover everything in detail today, but I hope that I will manage to give you some sort of idea what is important and why, and what you need to do to ensure compliance in your company. So let's start with the basics. What it is, what we are talking about, the personal data, what is included. It's basically any information relating to a person that is identified or can be identified. And we are here talking about natural persons like you or me or anybody here who is listening to us today. And what does it mean to be identified or identifiable? It means that there is an identifier attached to that natural person that directly or indirectly enables the person to be identified, whether by means of this single identificator or identifier or in a combination of those identifiers. And it's not only a person's name or personal identification number, but it could be location data, online identifiers, one or more factors specific to physical, psychological, or genetic, mental, economic, cultural, social identity, basically everything that is characteristic to a person and that can identify that person to us. We are also talking about voice, video, pictures of that person, everything. And in recruitment process, of course, there is a lot of data that you have to handle. It's personal information like name or contact details. There is data about the skills and qualifications like educational certificates. There are referees. We sometimes like to use a lot of testing in the recruitment phase, like psychometric testing that tests cognitive abilities, personality traits, or we do some technical aptitude tests like problem-solving tasks or any group exercises, role plays. In certain positions, medical certificates are obtained if the job is such that The person has to be physically fit, and it's required by law. Sometimes we also want to process data about criminal records or disabilities and so on. So the whole recruitment process basically kind of goes around and involves all this personal data processing. And besides so-called regular personal data, I'm sure you know that there is certain special category data that is usually not allowed to be processed. It's usually data that might influence employees or persons' privacy or candidates' privacy to a great extent, and might lead to discrimination or unfair treatment. It pertains to racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religion, trade union membership, also biometric or genetic data, health-related data, and data concerning persons' sex life or sexual orientation. So this is the type of data that usually shouldn't be asked in a recruitment process as well, because in an employment context, there is, in most cases, no need to collect that type of data. So it is not usually allowed to be processed.
Pirko, may I ask? I was just wondering that in both cases, like for example, medical certifications, like where to draw the line if this, for example, this type of data is needed in the recruitment process and what is actually not?
At least in Estonia, the law sets forth very specific positions where prior medical certification is needed. For example, the doctors or people who handle food. But in other cases, no prior medical checkups can be conducted. Our law does not allow this. And basically, you can ask from the employee whether the employee thinks that they have any kind of medical condition that prevents him or her to take up the position. But usually the employer has to send the employee to medical checkup within the 4 months, first 4 months of employment. So in the course of the probationary period, usually whether or not the employee is suitable for the position should be found out. So there are very few cases where prior medical certificates can be asked for.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Then we can make the personal data kind of change it in the manner that it's not always possible to understand about to whom this data is collected. It could be pseudonymized or anonymized. And basically, in the first case, it means that these identifiers have been replaced by a code, but someone knows the key to the code, so to say. They can reverse it and understand about the identities of those persons. And when it's anonymous data, then the identifiers have been removed completely, so it's not possible to reverse it and so on. But it's still considered as personal data also under GDPR. And in the first case, for example, for those who see the data where identifiers have been replaced, it's usually no GDPR-related requirements apply. But for those who know these identifiers, actually, for them, it's still like personal data, for example. And what it is that we are talking about when we talk about processing data? Basically, processing is any operation or combination of operations which is performed on personal data or on sets of personal data. And whether or not it is by automated means or not, as long as it's certain actions are taken, then we can be fairly sure that we are processing data. And basically, any operation with candidate or applicant data during the recruitment process qualifies as being subject to GDPR. So be it recording, collecting, retrieving, storing, looking at it, sharing it with someone, erasing it, basically everything that that we do with data is qualified as processing. And finally, there are certain roles in the data processing procedure. We do not find, of course, in the GDPR itself, like what are the tasks of an employer or a recruiter, or what are the rights of a candidate in recruitment process, or what are the obligations, for example, of the recruitment software provider, because these are not the terms that are being used in the GDPR. So we need to understand where to place these under the terms used in GDPR. So the most important person in GDPR is data subject. This is this identified or identifiable natural person, and in recruitment context, it's our candidate or applicant. And another important person is the controller. Controller is the one who alone or jointly with others determines why we need to process the personal data and how we will do it. And this is in the recruitment context employer who identifies what data is needed in order to carry out the recruitment process and find suitable employees. And then there is the processor. And processor is usually the person who is engaged on behalf of the controller to process personal data. And in recruitment context, these usually are all kinds of third-party service providers, recruitment service providers, software providers, and already maybe in employment context, you know that, like, for example, payroll service providers or such are also data processors. And processor can process data only for the same purposes and the same set of data as the controller does. So the processor will not get any wider rights, and there always needs to be a written agreement concluded with the data processor that outlines what are the rights and obligations. So and then what is even maybe the most important in GDPR are the key principles of processing. Basically, all processing that we do has to be based on these principles, embodied in everything, every action, every procedure, every proceeding, and these are the must for all employers and of course also service providers as data processors. And we will see also later on how these are applied in the recruitment process and what is important specifically for recruitment. But to give you an idea what is behind each enlisted principle, then let's stop a bit on the principles of processing. Processing always has to be lawful, fair, and transparent. So this means that always there must be an appropriate legal basis that enables us to process the data. The data processing must be fair. It cannot too extensively intervene with the data subject's rights to privacy. So controller must always weigh its own interest against those of the individuals, and it must be done before any processing activities is commenced. And controller must be open and clear about processing and notify all the data subjects what is being done with their data. Purpose limitation principle basically means that we just cannot collect the data for fun or for no reason. We must always identify a specific, explicit and legitimate purpose for which we collect the data. In recruitment context, for example, of course, we are collecting the data for the purpose of selecting the best candidate for the job. And When we have set our goal, the purpose why we process the data, then processing is allowed only for this specific purpose, and it has to be compatible with the initial goal that we set. So if we need to process the collected data for any other purpose that we didn't identify in the beginning, then it is not allowed unless we re-notify the data subjects. And then data minimization. This means that when we look at the purpose that we have set for our data processing, we need to process only information to the extent that it is strictly necessary to achieve this purpose. So any other nice to have data shouldn't be collected, and we only need to see that what is the minimal amount of data we need to achieve the purpose that we have initially set for ourselves. Of course, as data can contain all kinds of data, for example, also sensitive data and so on. So sometimes when data is not accurate, it could result in consequences to the data subjects, and this could be also adverse. And therefore, we always must have to ensure that the data we have collected is accurate, remains accurate, and if we have doubts about its accuracy, we need to update it to limit any negative results or harm to data subjects. Then another very important principle, storage limitation. Again, the purpose is everything. When we look at all the other principles as well, when we have set the purpose, we can store the data collected for that purpose until the purpose is exhausted, so to say. In recruitment process, this means when the successful candidate has been selected, then actually there is no more need to retain the data of other candidates. And integrity and confidentiality means that we must implement proper technical and organizational measures to keep the data secure and protect the data against unauthorized or unlawful processing, against loss or destruction, and so on. And the most important thing, even perhaps, is the accountability aspect or accountability principle, which means that the data controller has the obligation to ensure compliance, but also should be able to prove that he has been in his activities compliant with the GDPR. And this becomes very important when something has happened and we are talking about imposing these rather extensive monetary penalties on controllers. So everybody has to be accountable for what they are doing with the personal data. So now let's dig a little bit deeper. What we can collect and what is the proper purpose then in recruitment process. In Estonia, for example, our employment contract law gives here a little bit of a guidance, but it's also derived from these principles in GDPR that in recruitment process, we can collect data in which the employer has legitimate interest in, and basically this is the data which helps to determine the candidate's suitability for the job offered. So we have the purpose to select the best candidate for the job, and therefore we can collect or need to collect information that helps us to determine whether the candidates are suitable or not. And what cannot be collected here in Estonia, for example, our employment contract law also gives a little bit of guidance here and prohibits collecting of data which disproportionately concerns the candidate's private life. or which is not related to the suitability assessment for the job offered. So if we look at this purpose limitation and data minimization principle, then you can only ask information or data that is necessary and relevant when you consider the purpose, selection of the best candidate, and you should avoid irrelevant details and invasive questions. So even if the candidate, for example, themselves provides all kinds of additional nice to have information about themselves, so you don't always need to keep it, even sometimes maybe need to delete it because it's not relevant for your decision-making process. And how you reach to the determination what is needed is that first of all you need to think about what requirements are there for the job. Usually these are found in job profiles, and these are mirrored in the job ads that you publish. And I have to say that these job profiles and job ads and what you include in them are not important only in terms of GDPR compliance, but also later on when you need to, for example, defend yourself against any claims regarding discrimination or unfair treatment in the recruitment phase, or when you have already employed someone, then these give you the basis for assessing whether the person is suitable during the probationary period, and also take measures when underperformance or breach of duties occur. So this job profile and job ad are very important documents, and usually if they are very brief, sometimes it can be a problem later on in the employment relationship as well. And
sorry, yeah. I was just wondering, coming back, you said that irrelevant data, if an applicant, for example, submits such data themselves, should it be deleted and removed as soon as possible, even if the project is ongoing, or can you wait until the project is finished?
If you don't need that data for making your informed decision about the candidate, I would say that delete it immediately. Because the more data that you have and you think that maybe I need it in the future, the more data there is that you need to provide to the employee or the candidate when they decide to exercise their right to get information about what you are processing about them. So the less information you have, the better it is. So yeah. Yeah. So yes, when you have thought through what expectations you have for the job, then this helps you also to determine what kind of data you need to assess the candidates against, so that you can find the best one for your job. Then there is the crucial issue on what ground the candidate data can be processed. It is very common that people always think that consent is always the right ground, or consent allows me to collect or process anything I want. This is not entirely true, because the European Data Protection Board has also expressed their view that consent is not the best ground to be used in employment context, because an employment relationship is a relationship where there is certain imbalance of power. The candidate or the employee is always in the weaker position, and therefore the consent-based processing of data is, in European Data Protection Board view, not possible, neither in case of existing or future employees. So the most suitable ground is legitimate interest of the employer, which basically is need to assess suitability of the candidate to the job offered. There always has to be a 3-step test conducted for this legitimate interest. Basically, you look at what are the interests of the employer, what are the interests of the candidates, and then weigh these and determine whether there is true balanced and proportionate interest to ask this data from employees. So this is the best ground. To some extent, data can be also asked without consent in order to prepare for entrance into an employment contract. But this kind of data is not relevant, I would say, immediately from the start of the recruitment process. Always what you can ask for preparing to enter into an employment contract, because certain data becomes relevant only when you have chosen maybe the top 3 or the last successful candidate. For example, banking details or things like that are those type of information that you need only for entrance into a contract and then not earlier. Consent is relevant only in very specific cases. First of all, for processing of special category data, for contacting referrals, and retaining then candidate information for the purpose of future vacancies for a longer period than actually is necessary if we look at what the purpose has initially been, to select the best candidate.
I'm really happy to see that slide, because I can say that in Teamdash we have the same logic applied. But in the meanwhile, we did have a question in the chat coming up from one of the viewers: is how long can we keep candidates' personal data?
Yeah, I have an additional slide about it. I will come back to it. I will respond it in a few slides. So yes, the response is there. Yeah. But if we take the person's consent, then there are also certain principles that we need to follow, because one very important element of consent is that it needs to be given freely. If it's determined that the consent has not been given freely, then it's void. So it means that the candidate must have a real possibility not to give the consent without any detrimental results, and we cannot bundle the consent with any other kind of expressions of will. So consent always needs to be separate, very clearly formulated, and in an easy to understand language. And it has to be granular in a sense that we cannot take a blanket consent that would cover, for example, all 3 instances where processing is consent-based, but the candidate needs to have like an opportunity to pick and choose the grounds of or the purposes of processing that are consent-based. And it has to be therefore very specific. The consent has to be informed, which means that all aspects relating to consent-based data processing have to be made known to the candidate. And the consent cannot be given in a passive manner. There always has to be some action on part of the candidate, and there cannot be any pre-filled or ticked boxes. So otherwise it might not be compliant consent. Then transparency. As we already mentioned, then first of all, you should think through what information is required, or what experience, skills, and personal qualities are required for a specific job. This is set forth in job description, job profile, and job ad. And based on that, and in that job ad, for example, this is the one that is usually evident for the candidates. They are not necessarily looking yet into the specific job profile or job description, because it can be more thorough than a job ad. But before deciding to actually submit their application, the candidates should be aware of what is going to happen with the personal data they submit as part of the recruitment process. So there needs to be a privacy notice for candidates, and you can add a link to it in the job ad, or provide it in some other manner in the recruitment process, but the main thing is that candidates should be aware of what is going to happen before they submit their data. Privacy notice must comply with certain requirements under GDPR, but in simple words, it's you need to include there what are you processing, why you do it, how you do it, on what basis, who processes it, who has access to it, whether you use any data processors, whether you transfer the data abroad, what are the candidates' rights, how they can exercise these. So basically everything that there is to know about candidate data processing needs to go into a privacy notice. And if applicable,
yes. Pirko, may I ask, is the privacy notice for candidates usually a separate document from the general privacy policy?
It depends. Usually I would recommend it to be a separate one, because otherwise the data sets and the purposes and maybe the legal basis differs from the usual employee data processing or other data processing. And as one requirement of the privacy notice is that it has to be very easily comprehensible and in an easy language, and therefore I would recommend not to try to combine everything into one document or to make a very long document, because then it's not very easy for people to understand. Mm-hmm. But I've seen it done in different ways. But the easiest would be to have a separate notice, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, if applicable, and you have certain instances where you want to process data that needs consent, then the consent also has to be informed. And basically, before giving or asking for a consent, you should notify the candidate basically about the same information as you include in the privacy notice. Sometimes the information for the consent is already also included in the privacy notice, and in such case you need to just to direct the candidates to look at the privacy notice to see what and why is processed based on the consent.
I also see we have a very tricky question coming up in the chat. Yeah. Is a verbal consent from a candidate waterproof? So in Teamdash, we do advise to upload a written proof.
It's usually not, because you have to be able, if you kind of record it, then you can basically, you need to prove that you had consent, and the verbal consent is therefore the weakest one you have, unless you record the consent. But the consent over the phone, for example, is, I don't know, in very few cases where you can take it, because you need to basically get the informed consent, and it's highly unlikely that you kind of over the phone read aloud the privacy notice or something like that. And I see that there is also another question that recruitment agencies wish to have consent because of candidates you speak with. You would like to retain all of them for future vacancies. Then it differs. If you are a recruitment agency and you want to collect a talent pool and to kind of mediate these people to other potential employers, then you are yourself a data controller, and then you have a different kind of relationship with those people who are in your talent pool. Then of course you need to consent to keep them in the database for future vacancies. But if they apply through you only for a very specific position, then you don't need their consent if you use the data only for assessing whether they are suitable for this position. So let's see if we can manage with the time. And now I come to the interesting issue of data retention that we had a question about. Well, there is no number of months or years given in the GDPR for retaining the data. Basically, you can retain the data until it has served its purpose, until the successful candidate has been chosen, and until the statute of limitation period for claims relating to recruitment process has expired. The usual claims relate to possible discrimination or unfair treatment. I don't know any other kind of claims that could pop up in the context of recruitment phase. In Estonia, for example, the statute of limitation period for this type of claims is 12 months. So it's justified and legitimate to keep the candidate data for 12 months. But you should keep only such data that is necessary for you to defend yourself against the possible claims that the unsuccessful candidates might bring forward. Other data you need to delete immediately. And if you want to retain candidate data for any further vacancies, then there is always a consent needed. So yes, basically every time you need to assess what was the purpose of collecting this data. Has this purpose been exhausted, or and then if you determine that it has been exhausted, you have to delete the data. So, as mentioned already, candidates have several rights, and there are some rights that, for example, in recruitment phase are not maybe so relevant, like right to data portability. This is usually not relevant in recruitment phase, but everybody has the right to access their data. They can ask it to be amended. They can ask it to be deleted. They can ask to restrict processing. They can object to processing. And when there is consent-based processing, then they have the right to withdraw the consent. And this is also one of the reasons why we do not kind of recommend consent in instances where you need the data, because when the data subject withdraws their consent, then you cannot do anything with the data anymore. So it's always better to have some other ground of processing than consent in case of data that you really need. And one very important aspect that I forgot to mention when I was talking about consent is that consent does not legitimize any data processing purpose or activity that otherwise might not be justified. So you cannot use the argument that, okay, I wanted to kind of process data about, I don't know, a candidate's plans to have children in the next two years, and she agreed to provide such data. This doesn't make the data processing legal, basically. So this has to be kept in mind. And then there are several other important aspects that are very important in terms of the accountability principle, because if employer or data controller does not follow these tasks and duties that the GDPR gives to them, then liability might follow. Basically, it's very important to ensure that data is kept in a confidential manner and candidate privacy is respected. This also includes the prohibition to disclose data arbitrarily. You need to disclose recruitment data only on need-to-know basis, and keep recipients of such data to a minimum. For example, it's not good practice to share the candidate CVs or data with everybody in the company. So when you do it, then again, if the candidate asks you, what have you done with my data, then you have to provide the information about everybody to whom you sent this data. Then another important thing to keep in mind is basically every controller and data processor has to keep a register of processing activities. You need to understand what the data flows are in terms of processing recruitment data, and basically you keep track of what you do with the data. And it helps sometimes if you do this exercise. It's one of the obligations of controllers to have this data registry in place. When you do it, it sometimes helps you to streamline the processes in your company, get rid of unnecessary processing activities or unnecessary data. So it kind of even helps you to clean up your processes. So it's a useful tool in other aspects as well. You need to use secure software, verify vendor compliance, and I saw that someone asked about AI Act and its relevance to recruitment. AI Act is very relevant in terms of recruitment, because AI-based recruitment tools fall under the regulation of AI Act, and there are certain requirements to what need to be met by the providers of such tools, and they are considered risky tools. And before you start to use any of them, you need to investigate on your part as well whether they basically are compliant, and what is the input given to the AI tool, and how it prevents like possibly discriminating results or decisions. What else is important? You have to have in place internal data processing policies. Everybody in your company should know how to handle recruitment data, or not everybody, or those who have to handle it. And it's also important to provide regular trainings to raise awareness of data protection. You need to look at your talent database. You need to verify whether there is some data that already needs to be deleted, whether something needs to be updated, whether consents need to be updated, or so on. You should be ready to address any data breach incidents. There are, depending on what is the impact of the data breach, you might need to notify the local data protection authority and the data subjects themselves as well. So it would be good if you have protocols how to do it. And as these candidates or data subjects have certain rights, what they can exercise with regard to their data, then you should make sure that you have that they have an easy possibility to exercise those rights, and that you yourself are able also to respond to any of such requests. And finally, what happens when you do not comply? Of course, we have these very high financial penalties. It used to be so that in Estonia it was not possible to impose yet the high penalties, but since autumn last year, we have also now the possibility. And what is important is that a legal entity can be held liable also if they have been inactive, if they have had a legal obligation to do something, for example, if they act as a data controller, if they have not complied with any of the obligations under the GDPR, then they are in trouble. Inactivity is also punishable, and the liability expands to management board members or other company representatives who have the power to decide, for example, over data processing activities, or also any other person who, due to inadequate organization of work or inadequate supervision, have been in breach with the requirements. And as you know, the financial penalties may amount up to 20 million or up to 4% of the global turnover, over whichever is a higher amount. Of course, what else might come your way if you are non-compliant is reputational damage. It is very easy to write about everything in social media. You can end up in TV or newspapers. There can occur data breaches. Data subjects can file complaints. You can end up in disputes if somebody can really prove that not respecting their rights to privacy caused them damage. They can also claim monetary or non-monetary damage. You can attract audits and investigations from supervisory authorities, in some cases, in some countries, criminal charges, and you might be excluded also from certain projects like public tenders and so on when there you have known history of not being compliant with data protection requirements. So I think I have exhausted my slides. I see there are a lot of questions. I don't know, how shall we?
Well, there is. I think it's a very common question from recruiters. They have I can often worry that hiring managers, if recruiters are not using any software to streamline the processes, and you have CVs on the mailboxes, you share them via email. Mm-hmm. So what happens if that kind of data is kind of forgotten in the inboxes of managers?
It's not good, of course, because it's first of all, I would say that to prevent this from happening, maybe share the recruitment data through some shared drive instead of sending it to email. This would prevent it from being stored in someone's inbox. What also could happen is that if some candidate exercises the right to access information what is being processed about them, then you have to swipe all the inboxes and search histories and so on to find all this data from there. So it's usually, it doesn't end up probably in a very significant harm to anyone's rights to privacy, but it shows that the company has not thought through what the process of data sharing and access to data actually is. So I would first of all recommend to think what processes are required for handling recruitment data and who has to access it, and then decide what is the best manner for accessing it. And I would recommend that it's not good to send it to emails, rather create some sort of shared drive that can be accessed then on password-based.
Okay, good. I'm just reminding to our listeners that we have a poll active next to the questions tab. And I know one question was about, like before, how sure were you on the GDPR matters when we started to listen to the webinar, and how are you feeling now? And I know that after Pirko's slideshow, I feel a lot more confident in talking about the framework and everything related to the matters. So huge thanks for the overview. I see that Dimitri is asking, are there any...
in Estonia? Not the big ones yet, but you probably have read from newspapers and heard that there have been these data leakage cases in some companies, and there the proceedings are still ongoing. So we don't know. Maybe in those cases there will be larger fines, because before this change in the law that I mentioned that occurred last autumn, there were virtually no big fines imposed. But now it's the supervisory authority has like free hands, and they are unfortunately a very small agency, so they have problems with basically human resources, or they cannot maybe address as many cases or that they would like to, but I think that they are becoming more strict.
Okay, thank you for the answers as well. So we have basically 2 official minutes remaining of the webinar. So I will still proceed to show you how you can actually apply those principles that Pirko just introduced into your everyday workflow with us using Teamdash as an example. And if you must run, I know it's almost 12 p.m. Then don't worry, the webinar is recorded and we will share the recording with everyone. If you still have, I will try to wrap it up quickly. If you have 10 to 15 minutes more, then I would be very happy if you could stick around a bit longer. So I will now share my screen. I will share my whole window because I want to hop between some tabs. So I will quickly navigate here. So who is not familiar, this is Teamdash, applicant tracking software. And this is the dashboard where recruiters can keep an eye on all their recruitment projects. You can see that I have many in progress, some finished here already. And if I enter the project view, you can see the classical view of your recruitment project. You have different activity stages, and you can see that I have some new candidates applying in. And so here you can see that you may have candidates applying in from different sources, from job boards, through landing pages. Maybe you pull some profiles from LinkedIn. And you can see that Teamdash includes a GDPR tab for all the candidate profiles that come into your Teamdash project. And as Pirko introduced, the legitimate interest is the most common legal ground that you can apply to process the personal data of your applicants. And this is automatically applied to your candidates in Teamdash as well. So you can see that we have a consent type called until project end, which basically indicates that you have the legitimate interest to process the data until you have made a hiring decision. Technically, if you mark the project finished inside Teamdash, and then the GDPR status changes accordingly. If, for example, the project will end, then all the candidates who have applied to different projects will make up your talent pool. And now this is the place where you can make some decisions based on the GDPR statuses. So the talent pool view is quite simple. You can see the GDPR column here in my talent pool view. And actually you can see that we have 3 different statuses. So the green check is very clear. We have a valid consent, legitimate interest, or a longer consent. The red exclamation mark is quite straightforward as well. We do not have a valid processing consent, and we should make some actions with these profiles. And in addition, in Teamdash, you can use a status called dispute resolution only. So, Pirko, I'm now sharing my screen. Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
I know you already briefly mentioned it as well. I know you had a very good, a bit longer explanation to what is the dispute resolution only. So maybe you can just come back to it for a brief moment.
Yes, as I said, the data in principle has to be deleted as soon as the purpose has been achieved. But there is still no consent needed for retaining the data a little bit longer if, for example, you need it to defend your legal interests in case of possible disputes. And recruitment may attract disputes over discrimination and unfair treatment. Usually these claims are then submitted by unhappy candidates or unsuccessful candidates, and who might think that maybe there was they were discriminated against. And in Estonia, such claims can be submitted within 1 year, basically from the moment that the person becomes aware that he or she has the right to claim. So basically when the recruitment process is over, when a successful candidate has been chosen, that is the moment that triggers then this time period for submitting the claims. I'm not sure if there could be any other types of claims as well, like, for example, general claims under contract law for causing damage is 3 years, but it's I think it's highly unlikely in recruitment phase. So it's this 1 year you can safely keep the data without the candidate consent. But thereafter, if you want to retain it further, you need consent.
Exactly. So in Teamdash as well, by default, we offer that the dispute resolution, so the yellow exclamation mark will remain here for 12 months after a project has been marked as finished. And so when dispute period ends, then you will see the status turning red, and therefore you can have a full overview of the statuses of the profiles you have in the talent pool. And now when you have profiles that need some actions, then we have the GDPR helper here. So currently you can see a little notification that I have a valid consent to process the data for nearly 74% of my talent pool. Now, how does GDPR helper help you? It's basically a filtering set of filters. So for example, I can sort out all invalid applicants. So I should take some action with those. I can just bulk select all 978 candidates, and with a quick click, remove those profiles from my talent pool. The default setting of Teamdash is that we offer the process of anonymizing, which means that we will remove those profiles from the talent pool, from all of the regarding projects. But if the candidate applies again, we can restore the historical profile. Of course, under the settings, you can enable permanent delete as well. So this is up to the organization who is using Teamdash. But we also have the anonymization flow available. So the GDPR helper helps you to manually sort, take action, process, keep your talent pool in order. But of course, as we said, Teamdash enables to automate everything that is reasonable to automate. And therefore, you can see a little robot sign indicating that GDPR automation is currently disabled. So actually, when I click here, Teamdash will navigate me under the organization settings, where all admin users will find a GDPR tab. And actually, this is the place where you can automate the flow. So you don't have to enter the talent pool every month, sort out candidates, and manually be responsible for removing invalid profiles, but you can let Teamdash do it for you. Now, if you haven't been here before, then I actually advise to fill in the data here anyways. You can always later decide if you want to automate the workflow of keeping your talent pool in order. You can always come back here, but the GDPR tab holds information actually that lets you use our consent renewal request messages. It also allows you to add or ask longer consents via our job ads. So I'll just quickly show you here. This is a typical Teamdash landing page with a Teamdash application form. And as Birko explained, this is just a text here guiding that the candidate can always get familiar with your privacy notice for candidates. And just this gives you already the legitimate interest to process the data. And in addition, separately, you can ask for longer consent, just for the purpose that even if the project ends, you can, for example, retain their data for future job openings. So these are clearly separate consents. The candidates don't have to agree with this one. But filling in the GDPR tab allows you to gather this type of a consent right away, because you can see that you can set the amount of months, how long is your long consent. So here we by default offer that it can be 36 months, but I know that in a lot of companies it's shorter, it's 12 months, it's 24 months. So you can set it up here, like how long is your long consent. Again, you can see the field here for dispute months. So by default, we offer this. You can use it and reflect it in our privacy notice as well. And here you can see a little toggle. So you can actually automate the flow of keeping your talent pool GDPR compliant. If I switch this on, you can always read through the details here. It just describes that once a month, Teamdash goes through your talent pool, basically applies the filters you saw in the GDPR helper, and helps you to sort out the candidates itself. In addition, inside Teamdash, we have a built-in functionality that you can actually renew the consents the candidates have given. So when they apply, you have the legitimate interest, you have the consent type until project end. And I know that a lot of companies want to maximize their talent pool. You want to have good potential candidates at hand at any moment. And therefore, you can use a merge tag inside your messages called consent renewal URL. So this means that, for example, a project is ending or has just ended, and you have good candidates from whom you would like to have a longer consent for the purpose of contacting about future vacancies. And when sending out this email to your applicants, they can open a unique link, and this is the candidate view. So you can automate the flow of updating the GDPR statuses, of getting updated consents from good potential candidates, and automate the flow that they can renew and give a specific longer consent so you can keep them in your talent pool and keep processing their personal data. And now this candidate view is automatically built into Teamdash, and you can see that the contact, the organization name, the privacy notice, it's all gathered here automatically based on the information that you have entered here. So this is one very good tool that you can use inside Teamdash. You can include it into the automated talent pool management. But I know that, for example, a lot of retail companies have actually turned off the automated consent renewal messaging. So you can still use it inside your projects, but you can semi-automate the talent pool management. So for example, I think here, let me now switch between tabs. Just under the message templates, I have actually saved a message template, consent renewal request. So you can use this type of a message anywhere. You don't have to automate the flow, so it doesn't mean the Teamdash will send it out automatically to everyone. you can choose when and where to apply this kind of a request, but you can still keep the flow of keeping the talent pool in order, fully automated. So the automation of consents and the talent pool management is quite flexible, and you can find a suitable solution for your organization. And when I go back to the project view, just to maybe bring the whole flow together, you have applicants coming in, and you have illegitimate interest, you process the data throughout the recruitment funnel. And for example, here I have 2 different rejected stages. So for one candidate here gets a general rejection letter, and maybe the other one who is a good fit for our organization in general, and I would like to keep them here, so I would maybe invite them to the future job openings. I have set an automated stage action, a message, and I can choose which candidates will receive a final feedback letter with the consent renewal link, so I can ask them for a longer consent and I can keep them in my talent pool. So this is a really easy and automated flow. And if the candidate agrees, then Teamdash will automatically update their GDPR status, and you can feel easy about your talent pool and whether it's GDPR compliant. So I've now quite run through the functionalities. Yes, I did it in 12 minutes. So I will stop sharing for now. And let's see if we have some questions in the chat as well. Why did we choose 36 months? I think it's just a good conversation starter with all of the employers, because as far as I've understood, Virko, you can hop in. It really depends on the candidates who you are gathering. I know that companies in retail whose candidates are often very young people who come to work at shops, you can't presume that they are still in the same place a year after. Or if you're a company who is looking for very specialized engineers with high education levels, then you can assume in more confidence that their specialities and characteristics are still relevant after 2 years, after 3 years. So Pirkko, how would you recommend?
There is no kind of legal guideline as to how long you can retain the data based on consent. Basically, you can retain it forever, but you must be sure then that it's up to date. For example, if people change their contact details or anything else changes that they have submitted to you, then it becomes out of date and then might not be accurate anymore. So therefore, it's useful to once in a while notify these persons that are in your talent pool and ask them to verify that the data is still accurate. But basically, you can store it until it's relevant for considering for other vacancies or until they withdraw their consent. But of course, you need to be sure that the data is still accurate and relevant. It's very difficult to say what the thumb rule here is, because it's based on circumstances and type of employee or candidate, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see that we currently don't have any new questions in the chat or in the questions tab. So I would say, since we have gone through our time limit a bit, I would say a huge thank you for Pirkko for being our guest speaker and for sharing such thorough knowledge about GDPR and data processing management. And I hope everyone got some new insights how to better plan and execute your hiring processes. And if I can answer anything in more detail about Teamdash and the talent pool management, then we're always here to answer your questions afterwards as well. But thank you and have a great day ahead.